What is up, guys? Welcome to the channel. In this video we are going to be doing a complete off-road air compressor review. That is right, this isn't a comparison, more or less. This is more of a showing you the different examples out there to hope you make an educated decision on which one will work best for you. We have Thor's Lightning, we have Morflate, we have Ezflate, we have the Napa style air compressor. This one is from Trickflate. I'm wearing the shirt because he's a friend of mine. We have the Milwaukee M18, we have the Smittybilt, we have the Viar, we have the ARB Single compressor, we have a ARB Dual compressor, my buddy's Bronco as well. We're going to be showcasing all of these together. Ignore this little yellow guy. This is more of a joke. You'll see why later. That was the first compressor I bought. We're going to go over each one, explain the differences, explain benefits, drawbacks. We're going to go over CFMs, liter per minute, duty cycles, heat sinks. We're going to go over where these things came from, who built them, bunch of different stuff. We're going to be airing up and down this Bronco multiple times. This is on a 37-inch tire by 12.5. It's a deload rated tire. It's an all-terrain, if that matters to some of you gurus. We're going to be airing it down to 10 psi and then airing it back up to about 35 psi, which is the street pressure that I typically run at. And we're going to be doing it each time with each compressor. This is going to take me a while, and we're going to get the time it takes to air all 4 tires back up. And we're going to get the heat, the thermal, and all that while we're doing that as well. With the thermal gun that I got, I also have a little FLIR. We got a couple different things, little tricks up our sleeve that we're going to be using today. And then once we get all the science out of the way, so you guys know how each one performs, then we're going to talk about what I call compressor gate. Now, this is going to be at the end of the video after all the cool science stuff is out of the way. There's a lot of stuff I see online about these 3 companies. Mainly, there's a lot of companies involved, but mainly Thor's, Morflate, and Ezflate. There's a lot of questions about, are they the same? Who came first? Are they all just copies of each other? There's a lot of stuff out there on the forums, online, on the company's own Instagram pages sometimes. So I did a deep dive. I kind of nerded out, and I spent about a month researching. I reached out to the manufacturer of each of these air compressors, these 3, and talked to them. I did a ton of research online. I perused the forums. I went through each company's social media page, through all their posts from beginning to end, and then I obviously purchased and or borrowed all of them to tear them down myself and look at what makes them different, what makes them stand apart. Are they the same? Are they not? What the heck is going on? And I have come to the truth, and it might surprise a lot of you, and it will set the record straight on these 3 companies and then the other ones involved as well. There's a bunch. All-Top is one of them that people were talking to me about. But then we're also going to talk about this one. This is a Trickflate. This is from a company called Tricky Motorsport, like I said, and it is similar to the Napa one that a lot of people buy, which is why I have this one. This is a unbiased review. I made it as unbiased as possible. I'm borrowing this one. I'm borrowing this one. I bought these 2. I'm borrowing this one. This one was given to me for free about 2 years ago, and I bought this one. I bought the ARB in my Bronco, and my buddy's Bronco with the twin ARB I am borrowing as well. I have no skin in the game. Before I decided to make this video, I actually didn't have any of this, and I never really wanted a 4-way air system, which is what these use. So I want to make this as unbiased as possible because I saw a lot of influencers online talking about this one's the best. No, this one's the best. So decided it's time to settle that once and for all. So let's get started. I do apologize for the noise. My neighbor is mowing his yard. I can't escape it, but the mic should cancel it out. We're going to talk about deflation really quick, okay? For the longest time, I have used a knife, believe it or not, to deflate my tires because I'm cheap. I have an XJ. That should say everything you need to know about me. So I used a knife, just push on the valve, call it good. Well, I got tired of taking forever, and everyone was airing down and hitting the trails way ahead of me. So kick that to the side. Amazon special, 30 bucks right here. This is a valve stem remover. It screws on to the valve, and then you can actually unscrew the valve stem, pull it out, air shoots out, and you can check the pressure as it deflates. And it also glows in the dark, which is pretty handy for nighttime deflation techniques. So I've been using this now for several years. I love it. I have never seen the need to go past this. It just takes me a few minutes with this already. So spending $100, 50 bucks to save 2 minutes of time. Hasn't been worth it to me, but some people do like that fancy stuff. And for that, enter this sucker. Now this bag is by Morflate, or this hose system, but all the companies offer these. There's a ton out there. This is not a video about hose systems. I have the Morflate one simply because their shop is an hour away from, half hour away from me. So I just drive over there and I bought it for this video. So that's what I did. Here it is. And basically you hook all four ends to all four of your tires, and then you deflate. People like that. I think it takes up a lot of room, but you'll see why this four-way air system is going to be relevant to this video. So stay tuned. Okay, so first up, we're going to talk about this little guy. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, this little guy, fun fact, I bought this compressor when I first started off-roading here in the States because I was told I needed air compressors. So I went and bought one at the local Harbor Freight. Got this guy. Turns out this sucker does not air up car tires. And yeah, that was a waste of 20 bucks. I still have it 6 years later. Here it is. It doesn't work. Don't get this one. Let's talk air compressors, some of the features, duty cycles, and what we have going on. Now this is a Viar, okay? A couple things you're going to want to note. This is universal across the board when it comes to air compressors. Is we have, first off, the cylinder. So you're going to have single and you're going to have dual. Dual just means twice the amount. There's two pistons pushing air instead of just one, okay? That's going to equal quicker, stronger, faster, etc. Two is better than one. It's double. On your piston, you got a couple different things. This is going to be like the cylinder, the overall thing, and you're going to have what's called heat sinks, okay? Think of it as like air cooling, like on an engine. It's the same concept. There's a piston moving very fast. It generates heat. Heat destroys things over time. It degrades it, so you want this sucker to stay cool. The way we keep them cool is via heat sinks. It's an aluminum or some sort of metal housing on the outside, and it allows more surface area for air to absorb that heat and pull it away from the cylinder, keeping it as cool as possible, which is why metal is important. So remember that, heat sinks. That's going to come up on another compressor later. Okay, so now we know what all that means as far as like the heat sinks and whatever. So let's keep that in mind. That's going to come up later, like I said. But now we got to talk about CFM, or liters per minute. So we have L/min, that stands for liters per minute. The other way it's measured is CFM, which is cubic feet per minute. It means the same thing. It's just a measurement of the air that's being pushed out by the compressor. Another thing that's important to remember is the duty cycle. Now CFM and the duty cycle, you can't just give a flat number because it changes. On a lot of the compressors, you'll notice if it's done right, you look at it and it will tell you the CFM at a certain pressure. So if an air compressor says, for example, that it's putting out, just for comparison's sake, 10 CFM at 20 psi, then when your tires are at 40 psi, that air output from the compressor is now going to be less, okay? Because the more your tires inflate, the harder your compressor is working to inflate the tires, and the less output it's going to have because of the resistance being generated by the pressure inside the tire. I know it might be a little complicated, but basically, the more you air up your tires, the harder it's going to get and the lower output your compressor is going to have. So if you have big old tires and you're trying to use a 2 or 3 CFM compressor to air up a 37 or 40 inch tire, that compressor could really struggle, especially if you're doing all four at the same time over time, and it might take forever. Okay, so we understand the importance of heat. We understand what heat sinks are. We understand that a duty cycle is important, and it's important you adhere to the duty cycle so you don't overwhelm your compressor and melt it. And then we understand what the output is, how it's measured, basically as much air as it can go. So now let's move on to the individual compressor test. I've got this sucker air down to 10 psi, and I used my fancy 4-way hose system for the first time ever, and it was pretty sweet. But I will say I think I still prefer my single because I think this was faster. This removes the valve stem. The 4-way does not remove the valve stem, but I don't know, to each their own. We do need it though for the comparison video to hook up the compressor to all 4 tires at the same time to have a fair advantage. We can take out the human factor of me rushing from tire to tire. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's hook up these compressors and let's start pumping up these tires. Okay guys, we've done the tests. I have the data in hand, got some notes behind the camera that I'll be referencing for each compressor. But without further ado, let's get started with the raw specs. This is the Viar 450P-RV. This sucker is small at about 13 pounds. It's really easy to pack, but it has some heft to it because it's small. You'd expect it to be lighter, but it's okay. Think of it as like a dumbbell. It cost $350, so that is no small price for this small package. A couple deets right off the bat. This has, on the same website, it says 100% duty cycle, which means you can go forever. But then it also says don't operate it past 20 minutes. So I was a little worried about that. However, at 23 amps, it does not draw a lot of power. It comes with a 1-year warranty. It's rugged, it's simple. This one's almost 10 years old, and it's still trucking just fine. Now, one of the reasons it is so reliable is because the tolerances are very low. This is a very low power compressor. It only puts out 1.8 CFM at 0 PSI. So at 0 PSI, that's when it should be operating the most efficiently and the best because there's no back pressure. And it's only putting out 1.8 CFM. So that translates to time it takes to air up all four 37-inch tires from 10 PSI to 35 PSI. It took this thing 24 minutes and 47 seconds. You can have a beer, get sober again, and then drive home before this thing has your tires aired up. That's how slow it is. But like I said, it goes forever and it's small, easy to pack. The temperatures on the cylinder head got to 178 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not that bad at all. Again, low tolerances. There was no hose. It does come with a bunch of other features, hoses and kits. It works with the 4-way system. Like I said, it's rugged, it's simple. It's a good bang for the buck, but it is, like I said, very expensive. On to the next. Okay, next up, we have a surprising one. This is an M18. This is from Milwaukee. It's pretty interesting. It's a very small, very light package. The piston is inside here. It's encased in a heavy-duty plastic. It has a dashboard which has memory settings for PSI. It has, I think, 5 different settings. You can change the PSI, power, units, and start to inflate. It uses a battery pack versus the battery on your vehicle, so you don't have to have cables or anything that it carries around. On the back end, it has a single cable that comes off with options for pumping up bike tires and inflatables and a bunch of other stuff, as well as your car tire. So pretty impressive there. I couldn't find any CFM ratings for it really. They're just not an option that I could find. I also couldn't find a duty cycle. This thing costs $180, but you do need a battery, which is sold separately. So if you're not a Milwaukee guru and you don't have any of those, you're gonna have to buy a separate battery and charger for about $100 for one battery. It aired up all 4 37-inch tires in 15 minutes and 40 seconds. In that time, it used 75% of one battery, meaning you probably want to have a second battery on hand if you want to do any additional off-roading or air up a buddy's tires, or you have some issues along the way on the trail. So the auto shut-off feature as well is pretty cool. It'll shut off once it reaches your set pressure, but it does not work with the 4-way air system. I had an adapter for it, but it just kept throwing an error code. It didn't like it for some reason, so I ended up doing one tire at a time, which still only took 15 minutes and 40 seconds, so not that bad for this system. It does cost $280 in total though, plus tax if you don't have a battery. Oh, and I did a temperature reading on this thing as well, and it was really hard to find. This whole area was glowing really hot in the thermals, while this area was actually pretty cool. And it was reading about 130 degrees on the plastic, but plastic doesn't transmit heat very well. It just kind of holds it all inside. So I'm not sure how hot the compressor itself actually got. There was a fan going on pretty hard when I was done, so I kept the battery on and let it cool itself down. But it was pretty darn good. And the one last thing about this compressor as well is it doesn't have a duty cycle per se, but it does talk about it. It says after each 20 minutes of use, they want you to let it cool down for 40 minutes, which is pretty significant if you think about it. You use it one time to air up all 4 tires and don't use it again for 40 minutes. Otherwise, you can risk damaging your compressor. Just something to keep in mind. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, next up we have a truck of an air compressor. This thing is also Old Faithful is what I call it. It's a little bit bigger than the Viar, and it weighs about the same, if not a little bit more. This here is the Smittybilt 2781. This sucker cost $160, which is why I think it's a great price for what it is. And the cylinder temps, they got up to 175 Fahrenheit. The hose, it has a rubber hose that got up to 150 degrees, so too hot to touch, But I mean, this is an old compressor. It's been working well for me for a number of years. It's still going strong. It has a couple features. It has a circuit breaker reset, and it has a purge valve to let the excess pressure out of the cylinder when you're done filling up your tires, because some air is still stored in there, creating a back pressure. It releases that right away. It has a plastic heat sink. That's a no bueno, because plastic doesn't do well to dissipate heat, but the top of it is also plastic, so this is all fake right here. But it still didn't get that hot, but it could also be just the fact that we couldn't get to the cylinder itself because the heat sinks weren't functional, so we're not getting a true reading on that. It has 5.6 CFM, but it doesn't specify a wet tire pressure. However, we know it works pretty well because it aired up all four 37-inch tires using the four-way in 13 minutes and 31 seconds. It has a 45 amp max draw, so a medium-ish amount of power that it uses. And the duty cycle said 40 minutes at 40 PSI, so it doesn't say what the cool-off period is or what the percentage is, so I'll just say run it for 40 minutes and cool it down for 20 to 30 minutes just to be on the safe side. It does have a thermal cutoff though, so if it gets too hot, it'll shut itself off theoretically. No fancy electronics. It does what it does and it works well. And it's got these little things to clip onto your battery. But it takes up some room in your vehicle. Okay, well, I do not have the ARB Single in front of me because it is in my Bronco, because that's right, the ARB Single and Dual both have awesome options where you can pretty much mount them virtually anywhere. This is great for people who want to save a lot of room and don't want to lug a bag around and connect hoses and hook up to the battery. They just have the ARB either in their engine bay or mounted somewhere in the trunk or even under their seat. You can pretty much mount them wherever. They make brackets wazoo all over the place. The Single cost $334. It is a very low pressure system. It only operates up to 100 PSI, which is 50 less than the average off-road air compressor. It has a duty cycle of 50%, and they specify that you can run it 30 minutes and then you let it rest for 30 minutes, which is great because it takes 20 minutes and 10 seconds to air up all four tires using a four-way air system. And because it's in the engine bay, you got to think about heat, because this sucker got up to 294 degrees on the cylinder head itself in the engine bay. It gets hot. It'll be cooler obviously in other areas because the engine, which is running, adds a lot to the heat factor. The air compressor does a good job of like fighting against that heat because it's very high quality build. However, over time that could still degrade it, and heat is the enemy of any air compressor. It has 3.8 CFM output at 0 PSI, so least resistance, and then once you get up to 30 PSI, that goes down to about 2.34 CFM at what they call 29 PSI. It has a 3-year warranty. I've had mine for going on 3 years and it's been just fine. Sometimes people complain about it melting, but again, if you're airing up 40-inch tires, you're going past that 30-minute mark and you're in the engine bay, you're going to be seeing some crazy temps and you're going to be going past the duty cycle. So as long as you keep it in spec, you should be just fine. It's a great option. It's not too expensive and it gets the job done. Now moving on, talking about air compressors, we have to mention the ARB Dual. That sucker is $616. It is a phenomenal air compressor. It is kind of like a medium tolerance, medium output. And it pumped up all four tires in 8 minutes and 30 seconds flat. So that was pretty darn good. It is expensive, $616, but it does have a couple new features over the Single, which would be 100% duty cycle. They claim you can run this compressor on and on and on and on and on, and you'll be just fine. The temperatures were also a little bit less. It was also mounted in the engine bay, but it only got up to about 250 degrees on the cylinder head temps. That was both of them. And I think that's just because it didn't run as long in the engine bay to get up to those crazy temps. It puts out a little bit more output at 6.16 CFM at 0 PSI. Once it gets up to about 29-30 PSI in your tires though, it's going to slow down to 4.68 CFM. This compressor is popular because, like I said, you can mount it anywhere. It has a 3-year warranty and ARB makes some great products. But on that note, before we move on, I want to talk about some knockoffs. There's a lot of people talking about all these new air compressors that look just like the ARB compressors, single and double. They even have the same part number listed, which is kind of crazy. I'll tell you a little backstory on my studying that I came across. So ARB takes the compressors, they design them, but then they have them built from a manufacturer in China, just like all these other brands. They all come from China. Nobody makes them in the US anymore. I'm sorry. But, sorry for the noise in the background, I live on a street. A company in China saw what was being manufactured, and their company was called HF. They took the design, they reverse engineered it in their own factory in China and came up with a very similar looking product, but at a much lower price. They started selling in the US and they got in some big troubles. So what do? They changed their name, and then that company got in trouble. So they changed their name again. And then they started working with other companies in making small tweaks to the design, and then now they sell it through a bunch of different manufacturers, one of them being Rough Country. That's right, the Rough Country air compressor, if you look at it, has the same part number as these other ARB compressors. They look exactly the same too on the outside with the different sticker on them. But on the inside, trust me, the internals are not the same. ARB prides themselves on building every compressor in-house from the parts sourced from their manufacturer in China. They ship them over, they build it in-house in Australia and ensure each product meets their quality control standards. These other companies don't do that, and a lot of the products on the inside are different types of material and they're poorly made at times, and they're also kind of hit and miss with the quality control. Plus, come on, they're knocking off ARB, which is kind of outrageous that they can get away with it. But Rough Country does what they do, HF does what they do, and people are buying them in droves because they like the cheapest price. They don't care who came up with the original idea. Yes, here we go. We start getting into familiar territory with what I was talking about on my Instagram posts. If you don't follow me on Instagram, check me out, popo_patty. It's the same name. I have a lot of stuff in between all these videos that I put out there for all y'all. I have a lot of fun there. It's a good time just exploring and trying out new things. So, Trickflate. This is $125, okay? It's a really good price. It comes with a carry bag and a hose. It has this hose on it as well. This is a rubber hose, and it hooks up to your battery. This is a 300 liters a minute or 10.6 CFM dual air compressor. It has metal radiator, metal heat sinks, and it has filters on both pistons. You pop off the cover, and then you can take out this filter and wash it or replace it. They have extra parts available on their website. They're super cheap. It has an on-off switch. He has the option to add a pressure switch or purge valve basically if you want. This is the original one though. It does not come with that. This is a 90 amp compressor and it comes from China. You will see a lot of these compressors. Similar one of this kind is the Napa air compressor. They're basically identical. There's no fancy switches or knobs or control panels. It all comes from essentially the same factories. In China, fun fact, there are only 2 to 3, maybe up to 5 factories or manufacturers that build air compressors for the United States market. And a lot of them just come from the same spot with different spec callouts. So the Napa one, the Trickflate one, and basically any other air compressor that looks like this is probably going to come from the same factory and have very similar spec callouts. There might be some differences, but I just can't buy all of them to try them out. There's just dozens and dozens and dozens of versions. This one did very well. It did all 4 tires in 7 minutes and 11 seconds. The cylinder temps, 205 degrees on both. The hose got up to 132 degrees, so hot, but I could touch it. It wouldn't burn me. And overall, it did very well. It does run like an old truck. It shakes and shimmies and moves all over the place. Pretty loud, but it's $125 and it fills up your tires fast. Now with these systems, you do have to be careful. They are high output, and then as well as the other ones behind me that are coming after this, high output, anything at 10.6. A lot of manufacturers do not recommend airing up 1 tire at a time. They don't mention a duty cycle on this particular compressor, but he does say on his listing that if you're airing up 1 tire, it can do it, but the duty cycle reduces to 2 minutes. The reason you'd only want to run it for 2 minutes, which should be enough time to fill up 1 tire, is because there's so much pressure being output that if you're channeling it all into just 1 tire through 1 Schrader valve, a Schrader valve can only accept about 2 CFM through it at a time. So only 2 CFM is about the max a Schrader valve can take on your tire, which is why these systems work best with a 4-way hose, so you can do all 4 tires at the same time and you're not putting too much back pressure on this. Think about it this way, like you have 10 pounds of pressure trying to force itself through a hole that can only allow in 2 pounds of pressure. Well, what's that 8 extra pounds of pressure doing? It's pushing back on the motor that's trying to push it all through, and it burns up the motor quicker, which is why you want to have that 4-way air system. So just something to keep in mind if you're going to get one of these big boys. Probably buy a 4-way hose as well from the mini manufacturers that make them. That's it. It's a good compressor. It has an on-off switch. Okay, we are finally here on the big three that a lot of people were interested in and wanted me to talk about. We'll be spending a little bit of time here talking about each one, the differences, answering a lot of things I see on the forums all the time about who was first, who's copying who. Oh, they're the exact same product from the exact same factory. I've got some notes here, so bear with me. I'll be looking around a little bit. It's a little bit to talk about. I brought my coffee. I suggest you pause this video, make some coffee, and then come on back. Okay, now that you've gotten your coffee, assuming you did, or your beer, let's talk. So, all three products come from Carstel. All three of them. We have Ezflate, Morflate, and Thor's. There's also other ones to note. There's a bunch of companies. All Tops is one of them. Essentially, any dual air compressor you see with this panel on the front, they're going to come from Carstel. It just is what it is. This panel right here, this auto air feature, that is Carstel's design at the end of the day, with little differences that we'll talk about between the three. All three of these compressors are a 10.6 CFM air compressor. There are some differences though, and we'll get to the whole thing about who was first in a minute. But first we're going to give out the specs of each one so you can see the differences. We're going to start with Thor. So Thor, it looks the same, but you'll notice the big difference between Thor's and these two, and you'll count the fins right here. You see how Thor has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fins on the bottom. Both of these just have 5. Well, that's because the heat sinks, the air cooling devices, are different. Thor, it's metal up here. I'm not quite sure what kind of metal. It wasn't magnetic, so I'm going to assume aluminum. And then down here, it's plastic. That's right, ABS plastic. These two are aluminum throughout, and I know because I took a knife and I cut each one and used magnets. And all metal, plastic. You can just keep cutting. You can peel off the whole thing with your blade if you want to. Now, does that make a big difference in the long run? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure, but these definitely do have better cooling characteristics, as you'll see in a minute. So essentially, during the test, they all had very similar run times. Thor actually did the best at 5 minutes and 55 seconds to fill up all 4 tires. Morflate, 6 minutes and 7 seconds, so not very much difference right there. And then Ezflate in last at 6 minutes 10 seconds. Not very much difference, 15 seconds between all three, and all three operated very similarly. They have this feature with this auto air shutoff that basically checks the pressure as it's airing up, and it'll shut off, check the pressure, and then re-engage until it gets to the right pressure. That's why it turns on and off when you're using it. That's normal, it's supposed to do that. All three of them performed exactly the same, pretty much. They stopped all at the same pressures and then started again, which tells me the algorithm being used is the same algorithm from Carstel. Now, pricing. They're essentially the same price with some differences. Thor's Lightning is listed $325 or $329, but then it says sale with a slash and then listed at $289. It's a permanent sale though. That sale has been there for as long as I can remember, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So consider a permanent sale at $289. These other two compressors are both $325 on their websites, but guess what? You can go to any one of their respective influencers on social media and you'll receive a 10% discount code through their bio, guaranteed, which will bring these both down to about $290 as well. So they're all the same price. However, we go to some other differences as well, such as, let's go back to the radiators. What were their temps? Well, Thor had 205 degrees on the top of the cylinder head. This part was completely cool though. The plastic part was blacked out on my thermal camera, which I used a very expensive one, by the way. This is an industrial camera, Fluke 279 FC, and it cost $1,200, so we know it works well. This sucker was cool. Not cool to the touch, but cool to the thermal camera, and I'm guessing that's just because no heat's coming out here, so it all has to come out the top. It's not dissipating as well, which means it's building up more heat inside. Something to keep in mind. The hose is made out of rubber, and it's different than the picture they advertise on their website. I'm not sure why. On the advertisement on their website, they show one of these fancy types of couplings that the other ones have, but this is just a thin rubber sheet. It's very pliable and malleable, and it kind of rattles around. But this got up to 175 degrees. This sucker was hot. It burnt me, actually. It legit burnt me. The Morflate one, the coolest, at 190 degrees on the cylinder heads. The whole cylinder head was glowing hot, which means everything was working to let out heat. And they have a very distinct difference on their hose. They have a spec call out through Carstel for a steel braided line. It's much longer. You see how it's looped around? It's much longer than the Thor, and it has a fancy coupling, which is pretty nifty. This sucker only got to 126 degrees, the coolest by far. I could touch it all day, use it, and it would not burn me. And then the Ezflate was also super cool. It's the same exact thing, 193 degrees, just 3 degrees hotter. It has a rubber hose as well, but it's longer than the Thor's. It's the same length as the Morflate's, just rubber. And it got to 165 degrees, so also extremely hot. Now we can talk warranty. This one has a 5-year warranty, which is the best by far as time. However, they have a ton of legalese in that warranty, so make sure you read it thoroughly to make sure you're not messing up your warranty before you do the return. It's pretty long to read. Make sure you read through all of it. I don't know about anyone's experience of doing a warranty return, but just know that there's a lot of legalese. Morflate has a 12-month warranty with almost no questions asked. They said they might ask you a few questions on a form to see like what's going on with the system, to see if they can help you troubleshoot it first. Otherwise, it's a 12-month, 1-year warranty, and that includes a 60-day no questions asked warranty as well from the date of your original purchase. You can return it, no questions asked whatsoever. Ezflate, they have a 1-year warranty. It seems pretty liberal as well with what they'll accept back. There didn't seem to be any kind of questions asked. Again, very similar to Morflate's warranty. Pretty much the same. As far as duty cycles, that's also where we get into some interesting things as well. The Thor lists a 50% duty cycle at 30 minutes. So essentially you run it for 30 minutes and then it should cool off for about 15 minutes before you keep using it, which is more than enough. The Ezflates has the same exact duty cycle. Now this is where it gets interesting. The Morflate has a different duty cycle. 80% duty cycle at 0 psi. They specify the psi. So when it's running the most efficiently at 0 psi, running the best, it's got an 80% duty cycle, and then that would equal 45 minutes on and then 10 minutes off. So at the end of the day, it's probably the same duty cycle when you do the math, and because the first ones are talking about 50% at 30, this is 80% at 0. It's probably the same duty cycle. However, I can't do the math. The other thing that we get into is the CFMs. These two don't really talk about the CFMs as much on their website. They just say the 10.6 CFM, which is at 0 psi. This one actually gives you, and I'll look at my phone, a whole spreadsheet on CFMs, and it actually gives you like paragraph after paragraph about everything about this compressor, something that the other two don't. Morflate is very focused on education, and they have a ton of that stuff on here. They go into the amps, they go into the decimal readings, what to use, what they did with their compressor. It comes with gloves. But they list that at 30 psi, this thing is putting out 6.5 CFMs. So it starts at 10.6 at 0 and goes to 6.5 at 30. But they give you like, I mean, if you look at this, like they give you tons and tons of information on their product, and it just keeps going. And you even have like your duty cycles there. They show everything for you. So basically at 40 psi, it's saying it's a 70% duty cycle, and at 120 psi, you're at a 50% duty cycle. So it's actually way better than I thought. So they also have a rating on their CFMs. It's all there on their website. They talk about everything. Now, what sets these compressors apart? Let's talk about that. So we all know they come from the same factory. This includes All-Top and all the other ones that look like this. They come from the same factory. They don't all, but some of them place blame on each other for copying their product. They think that the other ones copied them. Thor, for example, claims to be the designer of this in-house in Colorado. I called each company up. I asked them. I spoke with Carstel themselves. I sent out an email pretending to be a company called the Popo Factor, and I asked to buy their compressor. And guess what? They offered me this compressor for way cheaper than what it's selling for, in bulks of 200 to 500 products on a container ship that comes over. So they offered to sell me this, which I thought was kind of interesting, like the Thor brand. So that was interesting. But anyway, they've all mostly at one point or another claimed to be the first, thinking that the other ones are copying their design. That's actually not the case. The problem lies with Carstel. Now, Carstel is a great manufacturer of quality air compressors. They make stuff for Snap-on, which says a lot about the quality control. All three of these brands had previous manufacturers from China. They were not happy with the quality control, so they reached out to Carstel, or Carstel reached out to them, or vice versa, and they started selling Carstel branded products as their own. Now, there is a Mr. Lang that works for Carstel, and he came overseas to the US and he met with these three brands. I don't know if he met with any others, but I know for a fact he met with at least these three brands. He did not tell, like, he met with Thor, but he didn't tell Morflate and Ezflate that he was meeting with Thor. He didn't tell Morflate that he met with these two. He didn't tell Ezflate that he met with these two. He didn't talk about that, or at least not in great detail. It might have come up in passing, but I think he talked about it a little bit with Ezflate, but not in much detail. Essentially, what Carstel was doing is they came to the US, approached these guys, and they said, hey, we have this new compressor product, and we'd like you guys to sell it. This was version 1. It was a basic kind of a white label version that they had designed in-house, and they had this cool auto air feature that they wanted to use with this compressor. They thought it was a pretty nifty idea, and they wanted these companies to sell it for them. All three companies said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's work together. And so Lang met with Elias from Thor's Lightning, and they sat down and they discussed the auto air feature, threw some ideas around, got some opinions flowing, and they engineered it in-house in Colorado. But little did Elias know is that Carstel had also gone to these companies about the same thing. Carstel is the one who came up with this auto air. He just talked to each of these brands individually about what they thought about it, did they have any ideas, and they shot some stuff back and forth over a great period of time. He came out, and in the same business trip in 2022, I believe it was, early, he met with all three on the same trip. And I know that because these two both talked about Mr. Lang by name on the same time period. He didn't want to talk about Mr. Lang. He said he wanted to keep secrets secret, which I respect. He doesn't want other people stealing his stuff. And he didn't really want to talk about what happened with Mr. Lang, but he did keep repeating that he had designed this in-house. However, Ezflate did say that he was aware that Mr. Lang had gone over to Thor and talked with him at the same time as well, because people talk, and he was aware that Mr. Lang went over there. So we know Mr. Lang visited all three. So version 1 came out of the Carstel product. There were slightly different spec callouts from the different companies regarding hoses and see the different hoses and some other things. But after some time, Morflate wanted to change the product. So he reached out to Carstel and he said, hey, can we do some different stuff? And Morflate claims that he paid for the tooling for Carstel to completely change up designs on this air compressor. For example, the original V1 of this air compressor had the plastic heat sinks and the rubber hose. Morflate said, hey, can we switch from plastic heat sinks, because that doesn't make sense, to all aluminum heat sinks? Carstel said yes. So Morflate says they paid for the tooling to create these heat sinks. Interestingly enough, Ezflate then got those same heat sinks. However, Thor kept with version 1. So this is the V2 model to an extent. but there's still some differences between these two that we'll talk about. I can't speak about how Ezflate got these metal heat sinks. I don't know. Ezflate claims they were offered it by Carstel, which I believe, and they had no idea that Morflate had paid for the tooling on it. That is, if Morflate's telling the truth, which I have no reason to think they would lie. But Morflate also asked for a steel braided line, which they got. The other companies kept with rubber. There's nothing wrong with rubber, but over time it can deteriorate from the heat. And as you can tell, they both get very hot. And this does an excellent job about heat. Morflate also requested that on the internals, they changed a couple things, and I have it up on my phone. Morflate on their website claims, and I talked to Tyler as well from Morflate, he said the same thing, that they have new Gen 2 upgrades to the system that we were talking about, and that would be the stainless steel outlet hose. They have a purge valve. They say these are unique to Morflate, so keep that in mind. They have a purge valve on the back that releases the built-up pressure inside the cylinders. Once you're done airing up your tires and you unplug everything, if you hit that valve, you'll hear it tss, and that's the built-up pressure inside the cylinders being shot out and evaporating, which helps lessen the pressure on the internals to keep them better over time, or so they claim. Thor does not have the purge valve, however Ezflate does have that same purge valve, so it is not unique to just Morflate. They have the resized aluminum heat sinks, which we talked about, upgraded from AVS, which Ezflate also has now. And then Morflate says that they have internal aluminum cylinders versus the original mild steel cylinders, which Thor still uses. They have the steel cylinder on the inside. Morflate has the aluminum. I am not sure on the Ezflate, but based on the fact that everything else is the same, I'm not sure. Actually, I am sure. We'll get to that in a second. I totally spaced out. Then Morflate also says they have new piston rings. So Morflate saw that the piston rings, which is like a little seal on the original compressor, was really tough, and they asked for a softer seal to allow better flow of the piston, and that's what they did. They claim that seal will help with wear and heat resistance over time. Now, this is what I blanked out on. I asked Ezflate what they did on their version 2 to change the internals out, and they said nothing. They said we kept the inside of the interior pistons the same, which would theoretically mean that they have the steel pistons and the original piston rings. They said they didn't change the piston rings because they felt it wasn't needed, and they didn't see an issue with the current ones, which I'm not a scientist. I don't know. Morflate says they're better. Ezflate says there's no need for them. You can be the judge. And then Thor just kept the same thing again. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of difference, and I would say no one is the first. Carstel came in hot and went to all these different manufacturers and had them do a lot of the legwork, such as Morflate paying for tooling, and then came back and just gave the after idea to pretty much everyone that wanted it. So if you see people saying, oh, he's first, or he's first, or they're first, they're not. They're all basically the same time. They came out with it, they released it at different times because, they're working on product line, getting it shipped to them overseas, building out their website, all that kind of stuff means they released at different times because that's a factor on them. But Carstel worked with all of them to design it at the same time during the same business trip, not to mention all the emails that were sent prior to that and after that with the phone calls that were made. But there's a couple other things still to date we need to talk about. We have to talk about the panels. Are the panels the same? If you see here, minus plus power M, minus plus power U, minus plus multi-single. What's the difference? Well, I'll tell you. All three say you should not use our compressor to power one tire at a time or fill anything up small like an inflatable. They said, however, if you need to, you can. Just understand that the duty cycle decreases dramatically and can damage the compressor over time. Now, if you call them and talk to them, Thor says that this is their product, that these companies stole it, as well as Alltop and the other ones. However, if you notice, they have that M on theirs. That M stands for mode. It's to change the PSI to measure in a K-PAR or a European standard versus the PSI standard. So it's not really that significant. You'll just keep it on PSI like most people. Power actually just means start. As soon as you plug this thing into the battery, it's on. So power just means start. So you're gonna pop this thing on, go to your desired pressure setting, hit power, and it's gonna start running while checking the pressure as well. And then when it reaches 35 PSI or whatever you've set it at, it'll shut off and stop. And that's how that works. And it has the algorithm in it to basically guess when it needs to turn off based on how well the air is flowing. It's a pretty smart system. It's got sensors in here, but as you can see, like I said, they don't have all the same stuff these have, like the purge valves that these two have. This one doesn't. The Morflate one, it's very similar. It's actually exactly the same, except they asked to change the M to a U, and the U stands for units of measure versus M for mode. They thought that made more sense and it would be easier for people to understand. Otherwise, it works identical to the Thor, and it even turns off at the same pressures, which is telling me that it's the same algorithm when it's checking. This one is slightly different. They got away with the mode. It only measures in PSI that I'm aware of. There might be a way to switch it with a fancy button push. However, it doesn't have that button here to change. It only has single and multi. And while on their website, they say you should not use this for a single tire, they do have a button on here, and they do say that if you do fill up with a single tire, to use single mode. And there was a lot of questions about what is single mode do. Some people speculated it changes the volts, it lowers the power to not hurt the compressor. It doesn't do any of that. I asked him, he answered, he's very honest, very nice guy. Single mode just adjusts the algorithm to check pressure more frequently. So this compressor in single mode theoretically will turn off more often to check the pressure, so you don't overfill the tire because it's thinking it's using 4 tires, filling up 4 tires. However, when testing it, it didn't check any more often than multi-mode. So I'm not sure what exactly it's doing, but at face value when I tested it, it's not doing anything. So just food for thought. But what about quality control? And what about the company's customer service? Because that should matter in a purchase too, right? Well, Morflate, very nice people to talk to, very knowledgeable. Their website and their company is very knowledge-based. They love talking about their compressors and the designs and the science. On their website, they have tons and tons of documents about the science behind everything, how it works. They have everything listed about their compressors online. Very transparent company. Ezflate, very family oriented. They don't have a phone number to get a hold of anyone that I could find, but they're very responsive on social media. You can email them too, and they are very, very nice people, but they do not have a public phone number. It's a small family company, that's understandable, and their product is pretty reliable, and I'm told by other people that the customer service has been fine. I did get a phone number for them because they wanted to talk about their review, because I wanted to ask them some questions, but that's not a public phone number. That is one of their personal phone numbers, so no, I'm not sharing that. In fact, I deleted it so I don't get tempted to bug him with questions anymore. But yeah, so they don't have a public phone number. Thor has a social media account, well, as all of them do, and an email handle and a website. When I first started perusing their website, I could not find for the life of me a phone number. I tried seriously to find a phone number. I could not find it. I sent them a social media message. After 6 days, they responded, and I did some follow-up. I was telling about the review, asking to talk to someone. After some follow-up, they eventually sent me a phone number to call. I called that. A customer service lady who was super nice answered the phone. I told them what I was doing. Elias came to the phone on speaker with her as well. But I was honestly not very impressed with how they handled my questions. Elias was not very eager to talk about much of the science behind their compressor. He seemed to just want to talk about how everyone else has copied him versus anything else. And he just kept referring to that he can't discuss a lot of the design because it's confidential and he doesn't want anyone else stealing it, which I found hilarious because I know through talking to Carstel and tearing apart compressors and studying them for a month that he has version 1 and these guys are well ahead of him now in version 2. So that was a little interesting. The lady also for Carstel said we pride ourselves on customer service and always answering the phone, which I found interesting because I couldn't find their phone number even though I tried. But the fun part is I went back after that phone call and now I could easily find their phone number on the website. So either I'm really dumb, which honestly can be the case, and I just totally couldn't find their phone number originally and I just totally missed it, or they do in fact have a phone number always listed and they do answer their phone. So either way, I'm not saying it's either one. I just, for some reason, had a hard time finding it at first. But now it's on their website. It's easy to find. It's under contact. She also said that none of the other companies will answer their phones. So what did I do? I did a test. Obviously, they don't have a phone number, but Morflate does on their website, which is easy to find. And I called the phone number. And guess what? They answered on the second ring, and they were super nice. So I put that theory to rest. They are not the only company with the phone number, and they are not the only one that answer their phones. Morflate does too. And they answer their social media quickly, day of, versus them, which took 6 days to get an answer back on a question. So found that interesting. Also, I want to keep bringing up the fact that this is not what they have listed on their website. I'm super curious what's going on here, which might have to do with quality control. That's right, quality control. We are wrapping this up, I promise you. I'm nerding out on this stuff. I find it fascinating. I'm assuming that their proprietary plug is what they spec call out for from Carstel, or they install it themselves in-house. But for whatever reason, this one got overlooked and came with the Carstel version of the plug because they didn't check the product before they sold it. I asked them what their quality control process is for their compressors, and they did not want to comment on their quality control. Morflate says they open each box and turn on each compressor to make sure it works and has their spec call out and has their products on it, and I think they install this in-house as well. So rest assured, if you buy a Morflate compressor, it's going to at least turn on and have everything they ordered from. Ezflate says that they batch test. They have a spec call out for Carstel to check a certain percentage of each batch before they're shipped out on the pallet. So it's up to Carstel to actually follow through on that and do that. You trust in them. And then when they receive the product, they batch test. So they'll check a certain amount out of each amount they get to make sure they're following their quality control procedures and make sure Carstel is holding true to their word. So odds are, for the most part, these are good. You could get an odd one here and there that doesn't work, but then that's what a warranty's for, and they'll ship you another one. You send this back. But yeah, they have the best quality control. Also, I want to go back to something real quick regarding the design of the air control system. The Thor claims that they worked in-house in Colorado to engineer this in November of 2022, but I know that Mr. Lang was in the US in May of 2022, so little discrepancy there as well about the engineering. I'm not saying he didn't engineer it. I'm not saying he doesn't think he engineered it. I think he just got duped by Mr. Lang, who worked with all three companies. And then if you look at other companies like Alltop, for example, it's the same looking compressor. It's identical to the Thor. It has the plastic heat sinks. It has the M for mode. It's the same exact system. It even has the same hose. This one that got overlooked in quality control, it's the same exact hose. So I found that quite interesting. They're all screw-off filters with the same exact filter inside, so they're all the same on that end. So that's pretty much it, guys. If you have any questions, I did a month of research and there's a lot more to all of this, but I wanted to dispel some rumors, talk about all the specs back to back, and hopefully help you guys make an educated decision on which compressor you want to buy. Rest assured, if you got any of these compressors, you're going to be just fine. They all perform very well. And the M18 is great, the Smittybilt. All three of these claim that they're almost twice as fast as the Smittybilt. The Smittybilt 2781 seems to be the one to prove yourself against because all three of them reference that in their testing. I found all three of them to be more than twice as fast as the Smittybilt. So just, it's harder to store these. It just is. They weigh more. They're big. So if you're looking to save storage space, you know, maybe consider another brand altogether. But Thor does have a pretty cool, nifty little basket design they have on the side for a couple different vehicles. I think a couple Toyotas and the Bronco and maybe the Jeep as well they have out there as well. It's a little basket that goes in the trunk. Is pretty cool. So all three companies are doing great. They have a great product. Check them out. Check out the other ones. Just make sure if you're buying something, you do your education. Make sure you're informed. If you're big on buying like American-made products, none of these are made in America. It doesn't matter what they say. None of them are made in America. I know Thor likes to talk about a lot of their products are made in America. They're referring to their hoses. And all these companies order their hoses for the most part from Taiwan, and then they assemble them in America. And they all three do the same exact thing. They all order from overseas and assemble their hoses in America. It's just what it is. Nobody in America makes the PVC hybrid types of hoses really, so you have to go elsewhere for that product. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's a long video, but I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions, let me know. You take care. See you on the trails. Cool your ash and pack your trash. Bye.